sure it's gonna work. Okay, now we'll hit your button over there. Let's see. I'm gonna adjust the camera. Just let me hit your. There you go. Let me fix your camera. So look. Don't forget to hit that middle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. All right, stand up straight a little bit.
I always do.
All right, there we go. That way we're not giving you a haircut up top.
Okay, we're not working yet.
Really? Okay, hold on. Wait a second, let me click on it. That's
It's not a problem. I know how to make it work. I just always go across there and get it up there and it'll work.
You guys can put a shade right here so when you pull it down, when that sun comes in, it's kind of warm right now. those couple of shoes today.
Yeah, today, that's what we're wearing.
Yeah.
Cut time, you nuts.
You know, he does.
He'd rather wear the closed toe if he could. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, and it is. I'm alive.
Mother always said,
And we're here.
I'm above ground.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in a place where everyone's been
I saw a statement in here
but not.
that,
Good morning, Karen.
And they're not able to ask the date.
it looks
Well, I think so, anyway.
And you should be back.
Oh, right. Oh,
seems absolutely out. One commentator called the book of Numbers the
I didn't study it. I didn't study it on
Now, that's Dale's thing.
What did he do? What did he do?
No, in his book here, on chapters 15 through 19.
Page 16.
16.
One commentator called the book of Numbers the junkyard of God's law, as if it was a dumping ground for laws that were not previously given in the book of Exodus.
Wonder where he got that?
I don't know. What a commentator. Well, he didn't name the commentator.
Well, incriminating.
Yeah, they didn't either.
Three of them that had COVID.
Yeah, and then they got a picture of a plane on the
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
All the toes and new voting.
I
I don't know whether they're trying to get voter ID down there or what, some kind of thing to make it so they can make sure people are registered voter, and that's what they're opposing. They want
Not get in session.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
What's this good about is their names. Names on the list.
was scared at the whole time.
We'll get that second one. So it don't bug you.
They felt like little grasshoppers compared to those guys.
I think that's just a feeling of being overwhelmed.
They don't feel like grasshoppers.
That's pretty much human nature to think that way though. If I see a giant, I do it the same way.
Preaching about on Arkansas, up in Oklahoma, over to Oklahoma, and Little Foster.
So how many years?
24 years.
Ron has had the size of it.
I mean, everything was flowing just right.
Good.
I got out in October 1st. '06. In November, I started in teacher school. And on my third, I spent 3 years in school. Northside School of Preaching in Harrison. Yeah. And then when Marty College got there, of course, it's going to, Northside just figured out. And I taught the third year there, and my first school there was 5 miles south. And a little town called Belfont.
Good morning, how you doing this morning?
You didn't drag the teacher in with you, did you?
I didn't see.
You'll be here. You'll be here.
It's in that traffic jam.
We came in, there's about 50 people in the hall, we thought we'd stand in line.
We just follow you, Jack.
Good. Hey, what were you following?
I've been retired from the Navy 51 years.
I had a stepdad that was from the Navy.
Well, I had to for 13 years.
No, you couldn't touch it.
Well,
No, let's say it. That's all we're driving. Stay with the truck.
Oh, you didn't have any more travels. Oh, dear. I like that.
I'm here.
Where's your late?
Where's my what?
Where's your late prescription?
I'll write it out after class.
You were military, now 10 push-ups.
No. When I went to college, depending on the degree they had would determine how late they could be.
So you're the teacher, so you be 1 minute late.
At 1 minute. Well, because I also had to make announcements.
I see.
But now Mike's looking at his watch, I'm probably 3 minutes late.
Now, I said you were 1.5 minutes late.
Okay. Well, we're in chapter 13, which in your handout is page 14. We're looking at chapter 13 and chapter 14. We're going to talk about the grasshopper complex this morning. And so remember in Numbers, the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 33, deals with the spies that reported that God had fulfilled his promise. And 2 spies said they could take the land, but 10 spies said they could not. And they incited fear by claiming to be like grasshoppers in their sight and our sight. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. Let me just mention Ovita Bass was taken to the ER last night with pain in her side, but she's at home today, and they could not determine anything, so they think maybe she just pulled a muscle somehow. So that's the only one I know. Oh, Pat Black has a procedure tomorrow, so she's not here. And Chuck Carter is here, but he's going to have a procedure on the 27th. So, but I can do that for you, Chuck. Yeah, it's just taking 2 electric.
I'm afraid you might not get it back, though.
All right, let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we are truly thankful for this privilege we have of being able to assemble together to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We're thankful for each and every member of this congregation, for the encouragement that we can bring to each other, for the privilege we have of being able to worship Thee, and we're thankful for the many spiritual blessings You blessed us with, especially Your willingness to give up Your Son to die upon that cruel cross for the sins that we may commit. And we ask, Father, that You'd be with us, that we might always recognize that all good things come from Thee, that we will strive to grow spiritually and we can look forward to that day that your Son comes again. We ask, Father, that you'd be with our members who are not able to be here because of health issues, and we pray that you would be with them, that they might be able to be restored to their health and be able to return and be with us as soon as possible. And we ask that you would use us as instruments to reach out to them and help them in any way that we can. As we go through the study of the book of Numbers, we ask that you would be with us, that we might have a full understanding of those things you want us to know, so that we can apply them to our lives, and that we would be able to be better capable of teaching others that they might know the truth before it's everlasting too late. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. All right, so here's some reasons for the grasshopper complex. Negative thinking will always create a grasshopper complex, and an exaggerated situation will always create anxiety, whether it might be good or whether it might be bad. They created a desire to return to Egypt when they came back and gave their report. So many Christians often develop this grasshopper complex, and the reason being is because some Christians belittle themselves by underestimating influence and ability. I have up there Matthew the 5th chapter, verses 13 and 14. Donna, let's begin with you this morning.
This is Matthew 5.
Matthew 5, verses 13 and 14.
You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has become tasteless, how can it make salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city set on the hill cannot be hidden.
And when you think about what Jesus said here, we being the salt of the earth, we being a light, some Christians just do not accept the fact that God has given them abilities to do certain things, and so as a result, they don't do anything, which to some extent hurts the church in the sense that they could be doing so much more, but they belittle themselves by underestimating their influence and their ability to serve the Lord. So here's the problem. The problem is one of will. Look at Romans the 6th chapter and verse 13. And Aaron, when you get to that, if you'd read that for us, I'd appreciate it.
Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness.
Henry Ford, a long time ago, made a statement that whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. And oftentimes individuals have that mindset that they can't do something even though they've never tried it. We don't know whether we can do it or not if we don't try it. And if you think about it, alone, we are in the minority. With God, even one person is in the majority. There's no story about a father who had several sons, and he gave each son a stick. And he asked them to break the stick in two. And obviously they broke it in two with no problem. But then he took a bundle of sticks and tied them together, and he gave them to each son. He said, break this. And they couldn't break it. And the reason being is because the number, they were strong. You can take a hemp rope, which hemp ropes, if you don't know it, was made out of wild marijuana. When I lived in Iowa, it was well known that hemp grew in the bar ditches. But in World War II, they used the hemp to make hemp ropes. And as you know, if you remember the hemp rope, nylon ropes are similar, cotton ropes are similar. They have individual strands. And if you took one of those individual strands, you could probably break it with no problem. But all the strands wrapped together, you can't break it. And that's the idea here. Alone, we are in the minority. But together, we make up the majority. And as I mentioned here, with God, even one person is a majority, because with God we can do all things. So what we're going to look at is some examples of the grasshopper complex. In Exodus, the 3rd chapter and the 4th chapter, Moses was told to deliver Israel from Egypt. And when God told him that I have chosen you to do this, Moses said that he had no ability to speak. He was making all kinds of excuses. And so Moses showed humility, which is needed, because he said, who am I that I should go? And that's the same thing in the church today. When an individual, and I'll not mention any names, but an individual made a comment that I was the head elder. Well, I'm not the head elder, and I never have been, and don't want to be. And I don't want to yield that kind of influence. And if anybody thinks that I'm the head elder, then I need to talk to you. Because as elders, we are together. We work together. And we need to recognize that I am no better than any one of the other elders. Every Christian in this congregation is no better than any other Christian in this congregation. We're not talking about our weaknesses and our strengths. We're talking about the fact that we need to show humility, because that is what is needed. And that's what Moses said, who am I that I should go? Well, God did not expect Moses to do this alone. Let's look at some scriptures here. Look at Exodus, the 3rd chapter, and verse 12. And then we'll go to the New Testament, and we'll look at James, the 4th chapter, and verse 8. Pat, you have Exodus 3:12?
So he said, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain.
So God told Moses, he said, I'm going to be with you. I'm not going to let you do this all by yourself. And I will protect you. I will do everything to help you in this way. Look at James, the 4th chapter, and verse 8, Jack.
Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded.
So when you think of that, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you, it's the same statement that he made to Moses. I will be with you, and I will help you along this journey. So Moses tried to take the responsibility, though. He said, I cannot go. And often Christians convince themselves as well that they can do nothing and live an effortless life. I heard when I served as an elder up in Illinois, one of the individuals got up and preached a sermon on even occupying a pew was a talent. Well, to some extent that is true. But the question is, as Christians, are we growing? Or are we just becoming a dwarf? If you take a seed and you plant it in the ground and you never give it any fertilizer, you never give it any water, it's going to eventually wither and die. And Christians the same way. When we become a new convert, if we don't make efforts to grow spiritually, we will eventually wither and die. And you see that oftentimes happening with Christians, because what happens is they may, when they first become a Christian, they're all excited and they want to set the world on fire. But as time goes on, some individuals get to the point that they're not attending on a regular basis. They do various things. They make comments that show that they're not growing anywhere in any way. And these are individuals that you have to do everything you can to try to help them. Gideon, though, was an individual who was to save Israel from the Midianites. Let's go to, well, that's kind of a long reading. I don't know if I want to read all of that. Let me look at this for just a minute. Yeah, I don't want to read all that. Here's what we see in Judges, the 6th chapter. beginning at verse 11, Gideon was appointed the sixth judge. And as we go on and look at this, in verse 25, Gideon repudiates Baal. He calls Israel to arms, which is exactly what he was to do, is to save Israel from the Midianites. And then in chapter 7, he looks for 300 alert warriors that were chosen to conquer them. Now the reason, if you read that whole story, the reason for 300, he started out with a whole lot more. But God wanted to ensure that the Midianites knew that he was in control. And so he kept reducing the army, and he used various tests to reduce the army. One of them was as they were drinking water, watching how they drank water. And those individuals who drank water and held it in their hands and was watching, kind of like a dog might do for any enemy, those were the ones that was chosen. But those who just reached down and drank the water and didn't pay any attention to their surroundings, those were eliminated. And God went through all of this to make sure that the right warriors were chosen to defeat the Midianites, and this would show that God was with them. The other thing you have to remember, though, is Gideon was poor. His excuse was he did not have enough money. Well, God promised, though, to be with him. Look at beginning at verse 36 of chapter 6, if you will, and let's read down through the end of the chapter, verses 36 through 40. Chuck.
So Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you shall save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And it was so. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece, that it now be dry only on the fleece, but all over the ground let there be dew. And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew on all the ground.
So basically Gideon was saying, show me a sign. I need to know, God, that you're with me to accomplish this. The New Testament reveals that signs have already been given. Go to John, the 20th chapter, if you will, and let's look at verses 30 and 31. Florence. Ron? John 20, verses 30 and 31.
And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name.
Okay. So, the New Testament then reveals that signs have already been given to us. Gideon's attitude, though, in essence, now he did do what God eventually told him to do. Well, God didn't eventually tell him. He eventually did what God told him to do. That's a better way of saying it. But Gideon's attitude initially was producing a grasshopper complex. When he had that attitude, well, I don't have much money, I'm poor, show me a sign, do all of this for me. But eventually Gideon did exactly what God told him to do. And Christians need humility. And we also need the attitude of the Apostle Paul. Look at Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 13. Mike, if you'd like to read that for me, please.
What do you say, Philippians 4?
Philippians 4, verse 13.
Thank you all, thanks to Christ who's been with me.
4, verse 13. Did you read it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening, Mike. I need to open my ears, don't I?
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Okay, and that's the attitude that we have to have. The same thing that the Apostle Paul said. I can do all things through Jesus Christ who strengthens me. And of course, we know the story of Paul. When he was Saul and everything, he was going around crucifying Christians, putting them in jail, possibly, well, we know that he consented to the death of Christians. But when he was converted and everything, then Paul did not hesitate. He had been shipwrecked, he had been beaten, he had been put in prison, he had been left for dead. But at the end of it, he said, I have kept the faith, I have fought a good fight, and now there's a crown of righteousness waiting for me. I like to ask young Christians sometimes if they truly believe at this moment, if they died, would they go to heaven? And any time a Christian says, well, I hope so, then you know they're not ready. We should be able to say, just as the Apostle Paul said, I am ready, and I'm looking forward to it. But some people are not able to do that. Now, another person we want to talk about that has that complex, David. David faced a giant, but it wasn't David that had the complex. If you look at 1 Samuel chapter 16 and 17, that's a story, but in 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 11, I want to read that. And Kathy, if you get turned there, if you want to read that for me, I'd appreciate it.
And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither.
Okay. So, David was too young, according to what his father thought. He had no ability and no equipment. But it is indeed true that he was the youngest in the family and was not invited when Samuel came. But David was considered by his father and brothers to not be of any importance. You see, David was inflamed with a desire to do what was right, depending on God for what he lacked. His attitude was, with God's help, David performed many great feats. And certainly we know the story of David. And David was the one who went out and he killed the giant. He took 5 stones. Anybody have any idea why he picked up 5 stones to use in his sling? If he truly believed in God, he only needed 1, didn't he?
You have any brothers?
Having a backup.
You have any brothers?
The giant probably had some brothers, and David was prepared to defeat them as well. You remember this army and everything. This giant, I don't remember exactly how tall he was, but he was considerably larger than any other man. And David was just a young lad. And he was convinced that he could do this with God's help. And so he did perform the feat. So this is not a case of where he had a grasshopper complex. This is a case where he proved that with God's help, he could do all things. And that's the same attitude we should have. Another individual we want to talk about is Elijah. Elijah was God's prophet to Israel. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 19, and let's read, let me turn back here. Yeah, I don't think I want to read all of it, though. That's what I want to look at. All right. Let's go down to verse 4 and read through verse 7. Now this is Elijah. He flees from Jezebel, the angel of the Lord ministering, and the Lord ministers to him. But beginning in verse 4, we see God encouraging Elijah. So read 4 through 7 for me, Isaac.
But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then as he lay and slept under the broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, Arise and eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals, and a jar of water. So he ate and drank, and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back the second time, touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you.
Now look at verse 10 of chapter 19 there, where it says, So he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. Now you can see that Elijah is at the lowest point of his life here. But then if we go on down further in chapter 19 here, beginning at verse 17 and 18. Donna, read that for me.
And it shall come about, the one who escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall put death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall put to death. Yea, I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him.
So God's saying to Elijah, you're not alone. There are 7,000 good, faithful people here. So don't think that you're alone. But the problem is Elijah was despondent. He requested death in spite of all the great works that he has hunted like an animal. So in essence, Elijah must have felt like a grasshopper on the sidewalks of New York City. Now, if you've never been to New York City, that's one city I would never drive in myself. And I really want to get down in the floorboard of the back seat of a taxi when they're going down the street. And just walking down the street and everything, people will flat walk over you. To me, it's the rudest people I ever saw. And yet New York City is a great place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's an expensive city. But I can only imagine that Elijah must have felt like a grasshopper on those sidewalks of the New York City. It would make anyone want to quit. And Elijah was not alone and still had work to do. And God expected him to continue to labor in his vineyard. So what we want to look at is our attitude today. Some Christians feel that they could do more if they just had money. However, the New Testament is full of examples of men and women working for the Lord with no money. Some Christians may say, if I just had more time. However, we all have 24 hours in every day. Look at James, the 4th chapter, verses 13 through 17. Karen.
Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin.
So we must decide as Christians what is most important in our lives and use the time we have wisely. We have a lot of the men who mow the grass here and keep the grounds looking nice. I've always felt that if the grounds don't look nice, there's going to be visitors that are going to be discouraged from coming here because of the fact that grounds don't look nice. And I would like to think that we have young men who look around and even women who look around and see something that needs to be done here in the upkeep of the building or the grounds and just go and do it. Certainly this last winter, we had a severe ice storm here that killed a lot of shrubs and a lot of trees, did a lot of damage. And we've gotten a lot of it done. Could we do more? Yes, we could do more. Could we do more in the way of teaching? Yes, we could do more in the way of teaching. We just need to realize that with Jesus, whatever we have is enough. Look at John, the 6th chapter. And this is a longer reading, so I'm going to break it up. Pat, if you would read John 6, verses 5 through 8, and then Jack, if you'd read 9 through 14.
You said 5 through 8?
Yes.
Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "Is that it?"
Yeah, Jack's going to read the rest of it.
Who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as many as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Is that it?
Yeah, through 14, yeah. So, do you notice there at the beginning, Jesus was testing one of his disciples? Jesus knew what he was going to do. The disciple obviously didn't think far enough ahead to realize that Jesus had the power to do whatever he wanted to do, that he could feed as many people as he wanted to feed with whatever they had. And so we need to just think about the fact that with Jesus, whatever we have is enough, that we just need to rely upon him to help us in these ways. Well, so some Christians, we'll not read this. Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30 deals with the talents. You remember there were 3 servants, and each servant was given talents based on their ability. The master said, "I'm going to leave town, I'm going to come back, and when I come back, I want you to return the servants and then some to me." 2 of the servants did exactly what the master had asked. The 3rd servant was given 1 talent because the master felt that he had the ability to handle 1 talent. But instead of taking that 1 talent and doing what he was supposed to do with it, he went and he buried the talent. And when the master came back, he gave that 1 talent back to the master, and he says, "You didn't lose anything, but you didn't gain anything. I just kept it hid for you." And of course the master was not happy with the servant because the servant had the ability to do more than what he did. And as a result, that servant was punished. So, as Christians, our labor is not in vain because God gives the increase. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and look at verses 6 and 7, if you will, Chuck. Yes, 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 and 7.
I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase.
Okay. And we need to recognize that with God we can do all things. So let's go back to Numbers, the 13th chapter, and we're going to read verses 26 through 33. And Ron, I'll let you read that for us because this is talking about the grasshopper complex. Numbers 13, 26 through 33.
Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran and Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flowed with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw there the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we're not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight.
As I have on the screen there, too often Christians do not realize their own potential. Every Christian should manifest Christ for others to see. In other words, as we walk and talk, others should be able to see Christ in us through our words, our actions, our examples. The Spirit of God can direct our lives that each one may be a giant in this world. So the question is it fear or unbelief? Look at Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 13. Mike, if you would turn to that one for me.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
There you go. And Matthew 28, verse 20. He has that one memorized. Matthew 28:20, Kathy.
Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world.
Okay. Now, first off, if you looked at the previous verse on that, Jesus told his disciples to go into all the world and teach them, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But the key to that is teach them again. And if we fail to do that part, then we have to accept the fact that we're going to lose some people who have said that they believe in Jesus Christ and they are converted, but they were not completely converted. It's kind of like the parable of the sower when you look at the 4 types of soil. You have the rocky soil, the wayside soil, and you have the thorny soil, but then you have the good soil. I personally believe that when Jesus spoke that parable to his disciples, that he was sending a strong message to him. Because imagine, if you will, and we see that today, it gets more and more difficult to go out and teach. The last time we passed out flyers for a gospel meeting here, Ron Witt and I was over here in this development over here, and we were met by a gentleman who said if we don't get out of that development, he's going to call the police. We left because we did not want to cause a disturbance. But that's what I'm saying, is it's getting more and more difficult to actually get out and try to talk to people, to evangelize. But that should not stop us. The point is that we can, in fact, do many things if we will make the effort. And this was Caleb's attitude here. He felt that God was with him. he knew that God was with him. And he said, we can do all things. We can conquer this land because God has given us this land for the taking. Let's go do it. Let's look at the questions that I had. 2 questions for chapter 13. Number 1, compare this chapter to Deuteronomy 1 verses 19 through 33. And we're not going to go back and read that. But whose idea was it to send the spies into the land? God. And how do we know that? It says so. Verses 1 and 2 tells us that. Second question, why is Caleb so confident that this group of untrained slaves, and they were slaves in Egypt, remember, are well able to overcome it? God is with them. Verse 30 tells us that. And so they can indeed accomplish what God has given them. Well, so we look at the reaction of the people. And we're not going to have time to go into a lot of this because the second bell will ring shortly. But notice verse 1 particularly. Let's see. Isaac, read down. Let's read down through verse 4. 1 through 4 for now.
So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt.
Now, I want you to think about this. What did we see there in verse 1? We see a lot of complaining. People, they raised their voice, loud crying, weeping all night. In verse 2, all the people grumble against Moses and Aaron, saying, we would that we had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Verse 3, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? They say that their wives and children will be taken as plunder, and it would be better to go back to Egypt. We have a full rebellion occurring here, don't we? Verse 4 tells us, yes, Jack?
It was fear.
It was fear, yeah. Verse 4 tells us where Israel begins to choose a new leader so that they can go back to the land of Egypt. This is a complete rejection of God and Moses. It is a complete rejection of the salvation that the Lord has promised them. He said, I'm giving you this land. It is a complete rejection of the mediator the Lord had chosen to lead them. They're rejecting Moses. And finally, it is a complete rejection of the inheritance that God promised to the people. Yes, Jack?
And it shows followers need a good leader.
They do. And so understanding the severity of this rejection, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces before the whole assembly. Look at verse 5 here, where it says, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes in outrage and mourning. Look at verse 6. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. This was how bad it was. And so the Lord's response we see in verses 11 through 12. But we're going to stop right here because I want to begin reading at verse 7 Wednesday night. And we'll read through verse 12 and continue talking about it there. But does anybody have any comments or questions about what we've been talking about so far or what we've seen in the scriptures? Yes, Mike?
I need to make a correction.
Okay.
Last Wednesday, I said that God changed his mind in response to the prayer of Moses and
Right.
Noah.
Right.
I should have said Moses and Abraham.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. I knew what you meant. And hopefully everybody else did. But thank you for making that correction. Any other comments? All right. Well, we'll stop here because I know that second bell is going to ring here shortly. And we will finish chapter 14 Wednesday night. And we might get into, let's see here. Now, We'll just finish chapter 14 Wednesday night.
That sounds more like a doorbell.
Yeah, it does sound like a doorbell, doesn't it?
But you can't miss it.
No, you can't. I asked him, I says, can you turn that thing down easy? No, it won't turn down.